You are listening to We Saw the Devil, an investigative and conversational true crime podcast that deep dives into fascinating criminal cases that are solved, unsolved, or ongoing. From America's Lori Vallow to Germany's Armin Meiwes, we examine and discuss the world's most shocking cases. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to follow us online. Check us out at WeSawTheDevil.com and We Saw the Devil on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget, you can become part of the show by backing us on Patreon. Hello, everyone. You are listening to We Saw the Devil. This is Robin, and I am here with part 2 of the Chris Chan series that I started almost 2 months ago. I got the first episode out, and then all hell broke loose with the Vallow case, the Moscow, Idaho case, the Delphi murders, and it just kind of took a back seat to everything else. But I'm really excited to continue it. And not gonna lie, y'all, I thought for sure that because true crime has such a very specific demographic, that a lot of you wouldn't be interested in this. And I actually confided in, close friends about that too. And they said, no, it's a really crazy story. You have to do it. And I'm really glad that I am, because researching and deep diving into this, man, I've forgotten. Chris Chan has been a fixture of gaming kind of nerd culture since the early 2000s, since like 2004. I think I heard of him in 2005. I mean, I was but a wee babe back then. I just didn't really see if it would be a good crossover with true crime, considering this ends in true crime. But yeah, a lot of you are super interested about this case, about this story, and I'm just really excited to be here and tell it and talk about it. So yeah, we'll get right into it. Just some really quick housekeeping out of the way. You're listening, obviously, to We Saw the Devil. I'm Robin. If you want to check out the website, it's WeSawTheDevil.com. From there, you can find us across all social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, the whole bit, as well as the Patreon if you're interested in financially backing the show. And if you're liking the show, and I'm not talking about just this show, I'm talking about any podcast you listen to, please take 20 seconds out of your day and leave either a 5-star review or just 5 stars. It means the absolute world to us and impacts our show on an administrative level as well. So please make sure that you are giving feedback to your favorite content creators. Other than that, y'all, so this episode is dropping here today, Friday, and then tomorrow I actually have a really quick episode coming out on this batshit insane submersible, it's not really a submarine, the Titan fiasco that we've been going through over the last couple days. It is just, this has been a tale. This has been an experience, and I find it particularly fascinating because in my lifetime, I have not seen the internet just fall and devolve into such pandemonium in terms of the memes that have been circulating. I mean, my God, on my personal Facebook, I cataloged like 60 of them just because I want to laugh until I pee 5 years from now. And there have been some differing opinions on the level of cruelty that some people are vocally advocating for, I would say. The story itself is pretty straightforward, but I see a lot of people who aren't really sure of how they died. So I thought that I would just do a really quick episode on who the people were that passed away, the story of it, and then also what actually likely transpired and how you die when you come into contact with the deep ocean directly. There's also another case that's very, very similar that I'll be bringing up as well, where a bunch of oil workers / divers actually died as well. That's going to be coming on Saturday. It's just a quick episode. But yeah, it's been a really exciting 4 or 5 days on social media, let me tell you. But let's just go ahead and talk about Chris Chan. Okay, so I know I dropped the Chris Chan episode almost 2 months ago, so we are going to recap a little bit. For those of you who may not know who Chris Chan is, please listen to the part 1 episode. There's not really a true TLDR version of this mess, other than saying he is a very low-functioning autistic man who was considered to be the, quote, most documented human on the planet. And that's because there's thousands upon thousands of hours of video footage, photographs, emails, social media posts, art, his art, and also fan art. There are whole online communities dedicated to following him and talking about him, as well as a comic that he created. In high school, he created a Pikachu and Sonic hybrid that he called Sonichu. which he went viral for. I mean, it was such a blatant ripoff, and a lot of people just made fun of it. It was also one of the earliest obsessions of online trolls. And they actually ended up going real life and bullied or harassed Chris Chan mercilessly. I mean, if ever there was a person who needed social and mental health services, it's Chris fucking Chan. Unfortunately, the story is super horrifying and has an ending at the very end that's basically what you would expect it to be, and it's pretty much going to make your skin crawl. That's the TLDR version, and there is a whole lot more. So if you haven't listened to part 1, stop here now, listen to part 1, and then pick up here. Okay? Alrighty. So going back in that first episode, the episode ended with Chris Chan going to college at Piedmont, Virginia Community College and getting suspended for a whole year in 2004 due to the graphic and misogynistic "I'm looking for a girlfriend" posters that he would post or hold up around the college. And just to refresh your memory bank there, his posters said, 21 and single white male, shy, smart, young at heart, computer skilled, humorous, a great thinker and go-getter, natural salesperson, enjoys good parts of life, diplomatic, friendly, loves his family, peaceful, very creative, he's lonely, seeking a cute 18 through 21 single female companion, 18 through 21 years of age, does not already have a boyfriend, single, average to slender weight, body type, white, lives in Charlottesville or Ruckersville area, does not smoke or drink alcohol, happy, positive personality, average or high income, drives a vehicle. If any men read this huge sign, mind your business. And to all men with girlfriends, except marrieds and blacks, go jump off a cliff. Have a nice day. And this is what people refer to as Chris Chan's attraction sign. He had multiple variations of this. This was the most popular. He would go hang out in the common areas at PVCC and try to get a girlfriend. If you recall, Chris Chan was obsessed with getting a girlfriend. He even wrote a song about it to the tune of "I Want It That Way." And it was during this time that Chris Chan began to exhibit a bit of incel-like behavior. For some reason, he began to believe that women were only interested in, quote, alpha males and that super aggressive, masculine personality. Except Chris Chan's version of this personality stereotype, he called jerk ops, like jerk ops. And I want to quickly touch on this entire scenario again here. I know we lightly covered it in the first one because it really kind of highlights Chris Chan's thought process and personality. Not only that, but this college experience was truly a pivotal moment in his life, possibly even the single most important event. And there's a lot to cover here in just the couple years that all of this transpired. Now, there's multiple timelines and a lot of information here, and I'm going to hit the highlights of it because you have Chris Chan out in the real world stirring up shit and getting into trouble, and then you have him online, trolls harassing him, emails, a lot of, again, guys, remember, he is considered the most documented person on the internet. So like every AIM or AOL conversation he had, every email that he's ever sent to anyone, any engagement with anybody, by like 2003, 2004, after 4chan got a hold of it, because I mean, like, that's great, right? The wonderful people at 4chan. People started recognizing him when he went out in public. They would take pictures of him and then disseminate that online. I mean, quite literally, Chris Chan is one of the first people that was just horrendously and mercilessly bullied. I mean, the trolling went real life. But as the in real life stuff is happening, Chris Chan is producing comics and doing a bunch of other stuff. And it's too much just to list in an episode. So if you're interested in like the full timeline, I suggest you go to a website called Quickville. If you look up CWCKI, like the quickie, CWCKI, you can actually choose a year and it'll literally give you almost a day by freaking day for the whole year glance at who he was. So, whew. All right. So let's pick it back up, y'all. So we're talking 2003, right? Chris Chan's enrolled in PVCC. Everything is kind of going okay, I guess. And on his 21st birthday, he's actually in a class and another student wrote some sort of assignment. Anyway, they talked about gays and lesbians and Chris Chan came unglued. he threw the biggest bitch fit. Very much not happy with that. And it pretty much like was his first instance in kind of the principal's office. He was actually, the professor did not want to teach him anymore. They kicked him out of that class. And it kind of gave him this negative mindset surrounding the college. That was only exacerbated by a woman named Mary Lee Walsh, the dean of student affairs at PVCC. She was tired of seeing his love quests, sweetheart search signs, and repeatedly warned Chris not to continue taping them everywhere or holding them everywhere. He would also make hundreds of photocopies of his newsletter, Sonichu News Dash, and then distribute those around the campus as well. And Mary Lee Walsh, being the dean of students, was like, bro, that's not really going to fly here. We need to put a stop to it. And she was very, very respectful. Chris did it a few times too many, and Mary Lee Walsh summoned him into her office to scold him. And the entire exchange between Chris and Mary Lee Walsh is readily available online. You can actually read all of the emails between them. They are very, very hard to read because Chris Chan does not have a great grasp of the English language at times. You can read them there as well. Now, he did end up having a meeting with her in her office, and she told him, you need to stop. You need to stop putting up the signs. It's misogynistic. It's not okay. It's making girls uncomfortable. It makes me uncomfortable. Little is actually known about what took place in the office in that first meeting. Anything Chris Chan has said, he's not a reliable narrator. But according to Chris Chan, it all started when Mary Lee Walsh approached him on campus one day, tore down his sign, and told him that he would never get a girlfriend. Any rational person knows that that's not what happened. And we know this actually for a couple of reasons, but the most important is that Chris has always had difficulties distinguishing fiction from reality because of where he is in the spectrum. And considering he wears the same outfits for months and months at a time without washing them, I'm fairly certain that we can't include the ability to dress oneself as a skill set of his. Mary Lee Walsh gave him a warning first, and then Chris kept doing it, so he was summoned back to the office. Again, we don't know what really fully happened in that office, but what we do know is that at some point, Chris began to talk into thin air. He was apparently pretending that Sonichu, his, Sonic mashup there, was in the office with him and he was talking through him. He then pretended to be Sonichu, ending his speech with crushing Mary Lee Walsh with a cursey hamiha. The one from Dragon Ball Z. And again, it's no wonder that he was kicked out of college. Not only was Chris Chan kicked out of college, but Mary Lee Walsh ensured that he had to get mandated psychological counseling and anger management classes before he could return to campus. Can you imagine being a grown-ass adult woman in your 50s, probably early 60s, and having a 21-year-old man come into your office trying to cast spells at you? Because I can't. And part of the reason I wanted to cover this particular era of Chris Chan's experience so heavily is that it manifests itself all throughout Chris Chan's life, and this woman is constantly referred to. So on Chris Chan's Wikipedia page in May of 2009, we're fast forwarding 6 years here really quick. He said, then the quote unquote Dean of Student Services, Mary Lee Walsh, approached me and pulled my sign away from me and told me, you're not allowed to find true love here. My heart was shattered that very moment. Chris never really fully understood what he did wrong. He just saw it as a female authoritarian figure ruined his life and took his love away. And he formed a grudge against Mary Lee Walsh that day, and that grudge was so big that it infiltrated absolutely every single aspect of his life, particularly in his comics and online presence. He was enraged. Now, while suspended from school, we're talking April 29th, 2004, so shortly after the incident, he wrote in his online diary, quote, that bitch Mary Lee Walsh got on my and my parents' nerves. She played social director and tried to frame me just to give me an excuse to boot me out of PVCC. All I'd been doing was trying to get a girlfriend. Is that so much to ask? I am very devastated due to my shattered heart that bitch caused unto me. My life sucks. Sonichu and I were featured in the PVCC newsletter, the forum, but still nothing. Oh, to become popular and to get a girlfriend is very hard. My mom may help me next month. Good luck. I did get to rub my Nintendo Power fame in the bitch's face. Haha. A couple months later in September, he said, I got suspended from PVCC by the board, and I have that meddling bitch to thank for this as well. I am super angry. My dad is bloodthirsty for revenge as well. He's going to write to US President George W. Bush Jr. and Laura Bush to help me get allowed back to PVCC. We all curse death upon that bitch, Mary Lee Walsh. It's been over a week since my suspension, like months at this point. I am depressed, lonely, sad, and bored. I have nowhere to go to attract a boyfriend-free woman. I'll be writing to Santa Claus this year, hoping that he will bring me one. And if you guys were like concerned that Chris Chan stopped his sweetheart search because he was suspended from school, don't worry very long, because he continued his search for his sweetheart in his off suspension time. He would apparently go to his local mall to try out this newest idea that he came up with. And this is known as Chris's red string. Chris would attach a paper heart to a red string, and then he would throw it out at women that he passed by in the mall, like cast it out like he was casting out a fishing rod. And then he would pull the string like he was reeling them in. And the small red heart had wording around it that read, "Pick me up and bring me to my owner." And then on August 5th, due to multiple complaints from women that Chris had been harassing at the mall, a mall security guard confiscated Chris's poor red string, and he never did it again. That little detail was published online, and the internet trolls absolutely loved it. And because his mall escapades were more or less stopped before they could even really get ahead, he was letting off steam the only way he knew how. And that's by incorporating real life drama into his Sonichu comic book, also reflecting on his online diary that he had. And this is something, as we continue through this analysis of Chris Chan, this is something that you're going to see frequently. What happens is he will take any sort of situation that he finds himself in the real life. If he is not the quote unquote victor, if he is not a winner in that scenario, he will basically rewrite it in his comic books and make himself be the savior, the white knight, the winner, whatever. And this is actually what he did here. Mary Lee Walsh was introduced in issue 0 of Sonichu, but became actual canon in the comic series by issue number 2. About this, Chris Chan, in his own words, wrote, "After the first encounter with Mary, I put her into my comics from the start as my personal main adversary, with her horde of imposter police people, also known as jerk-ops, and the notorious Count Graduan trapped in the glass orb on the scepter she wields." And her character design was kind of a gray-haired old woman that had a scepter. No idea who Graduan or any of that is, but the character was very accurate for what Mary Lee Walsh actually looked like. Mary Lee Walsh appeared to be like in her upper 50s, low 60s, gray-haired lady, very sweet and kind looking. And I feel like Chris Chan, although he's kind of a shit artist, he kind of got at least her look, for base kindergarten level drawing, pretty accurate, right? Now, don't forget that the board at PVCC had mandated that Chris had to attend psych counseling as well as anger management courses in order to return to PVCC. So, November of 2004, Chris went to the University of Virginia, the medical services. He went to the psych department, and he met with doctors Rayner and Dameron. And I'm just going to go through these. Now, these are known in the Chris Chan saga, if you follow his life, these are known as the quote-unquote autism papers. And you kind of have to understand Chris's life up to this point. I covered in the previous episode a lot of the major life events, but you kind of have to understand the household that he was growing up in. His father, Bob Chandler, was a brilliant man. He worked for Western Electric as an engineer for more than 40 years. He actually designed a variety of electrical subsystems. He knew his stuff. He knew computers. He was very much ahead of his time and a techie in the 80s before anybody else really was. He, by all accounts, was a sci-fi nerd, into that, into computers and building them, into engineering as a whole. He was first married to another woman, and they had 2 children together, and he more or less divorced her and then married Barbara 2 months after his divorce from his first wife. He quite literally just left his kids. He left his first wife and his kids and then got married to Barbara. They met in a bar in 1979 and married in 1980. When Chris was born and then, say age 2 and whatnot, he was pretty much completely nonverbal. Bob Chandler reminds me almost as kind of a Don Draper type of figure, not well dressed and well off or anything like that, but just kind of a hard worker, but hard on his children. Doesn't really want to be there emotionally, just kind of wants to do the pat, 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 okay, son, or let's throw a baseball back and forth with each other a couple times and then we're going to call it good. He wasn't a doting father. He was very, very emotionally closed off. However, he did try to instill in Chris when he was a child. He tried to teach him about the world, teach him about geography, share his interests with him, teach him about engineering and tools, electronics. Also, he got him into stamp collecting. So, got him into collecting. And then when Chris was 7 years old, Bob actually converted a huge shed in the backyard to almost kind of a lab. He actually called it the Dreaming Studio. It was supposed to be a place where they could go to build things together, electronics and robots and things like that. The Dreaming Lab never actually came into fruition, but he made it nonetheless. But it didn't take terribly long for Bob to be completely disappointed in Chris. He did not know how to handle autism. He did not know how to handle the behavior, the being nonverbal, the being obsessed with video games. His father did not understand the obsession with video games at all. Chris also exhibited a lot of OCD behaviors as well, especially when he was very, very young. And Bob just pretty much simply did not care. He just got frustrated with it. Also to note is in terms of Bob's impression and what he did teach Chris is Bob was actually very racist. Bob was a registered Republican and he would constantly make jokes about people of color, also women from time to time, but particularly Barack Obama was in his sights quite a lot. He made a joke that Obama would paint the White House black if he became president. And then Chris heard that. And then Chris had actually put that into his comic book, Sonic comic books as well. And Chris Chan himself is actually incredibly racist, as you might have picked up on in his Love Quest sign at PVCC. What's so interesting, and I also mentioned in the first episode with Chris Chan, is Chris Chan actually determined that they were trans later on in life. We'll get to that in a future episode. But Chris Chan, whom we've been talking about, now goes by Christine Chandler and is a trans female. And there is speculation on that as well because Chris has such a hatred of penises, literally of male anatomy. And a lot of people actually attribute this to him walking in on his father asleep in bed one night when he saw his father's penis because his dad would sleep nude. So Chris was apparently just super repulsed by that. And he would frequently talk about how much he hated men and male anatomy. And Chris knew to some degree, even though he lacked all social cues and awareness of them, he was aware that his father pretty much hated him. Bob did not really have the patience to deal with his son at all. Chris actually wrote extensively about interactions with Bob in his diaries. One of them from December of 2008 read, quote, "Well, my father is a major stressor against me, starts arguments, annoys me, rarely washes his hands after restroom breaks. Lord knows I've tried to encourage him to wash numerous times and rarely succeeded." When Chris gained internet notoriety, he would give his phone number out all the time. And his father, Bob, would answer the phone and actually combat and go up against these trolls, these, early 20-something-year-old men who would call to harass. His father would actually engage and talk to them. At some point, his father actually began to believe that there was some sort of complex network of people whose sole purpose in life was to make his son's life a living hell. It's really, really sad and tragic because Bob died in 2011 from heart failure, from heart issues. And that was pretty much it. He never tried to get Chris psychological help in a care home, anything like that. In fact, after Chris graduated from college, he did end up getting a part-time job for a little while at a grocery store, but he was never able to be on his own, really. He couldn't. He never was. He always lived at home with his parents. He got credit cards. He racked up his credit card debts. Chris's financial state was completely spiraling, and then Bob actually helped him out and paid all of that off. took away all of his money and then gave him allowance on it. Also, around 2009, Bob and Barbara discovered that their son had a tendency to cross dress, that he would put on women's clothing and skirts and stuff and underwear and parade around. And at that time, Bob actually asked Chris if he was a quote fag. Major homophobia there. It absolutely makes sense why in 2003, back at PVCC, why Chris Chan flipped out on a classmate who was espousing pro gay views. You know, the TLDR and the reason I'm even going down the Bob Chandler highway here is we're starting this episode talking about Chris in college, and you kind of have to understand the home that he came from. He grew up with a very, very intelligent, intellectually bright father who was into the nerd stuff and computer and engineering, but was not emotionally warm and fuzzy, kept Chris kind of at arm's length, did try to instill knowledge in him, but none of the I love yous, none of the cuddlies. And overall, he was more frustrated with Chris and disgusted by him by the end there than anything else. And he did not seek to get Chris help. And before we go back to the timeline that we were talking about back in college and Chris's reaction to it, let's just talk really briefly about his mother, Barbara. So Barbara Weston ended up meeting Bob Chandler in a bar in 1979. They got married. At that point, Barbara had also been married one time before and had a son by the name of Cole, Cole, who is 17 years old and leaving home. Cole hated Bob. Apparently, Bob was not a very nice man and treated Cole kind of shittily, and Cole pretty much pieced out and was gone. Virtually has almost no interaction with Chris, Bob, and Barbara, his half-brother, stepfather, and mother, pretty much at all. So what do you need to know about Barbara? Because she is the crux, she is the primary in the story. The TLDR here is that she was a secretary and then also worked and did some bookkeeping throughout her whole life. She worked at Virginia Power Company. She was married one time. She ended up getting married to Bob, and they had Chris. Now, Chris and Barbara never really had a loving marriage at all. They pretty much tolerated each other. If you trust anything that Chris Chan says, he later let it slip that Barbara told him that she only married Bob because he owned a house and she was renting at that time. Throughout her marriage to Bob, they lived apart at one point. Bob and Chris moved to Ruckersville and lived by themselves so Barbara could stay home and work, and she would visit them on the weekends. Like, it wasn't your typical 1980s single family home with a white picket fence. They did not have that kind of marriage. And Barbara is not a good person. And this was also backed up by her first son, Cole, as well. We'll cover this more as the series goes on, but Barbara treated Chris horribly. Barbara herself is incredibly mentally ill. She's manipulative. She's abusive physically. She is abusive mentally and emotionally. And she's not healthy. And she can barely even take care of herself. Bob Chandler died in 2011. Up to even before he passed away, evidenced in Chris's videos, like home videos that are put online, part of that documentation of his life, Barb was always seen in a chair, just almost in a catatonic state. She doesn't really get up. She really doesn't do anything. And she just kind of like sits there. In Chris's early life, Barb and Bob would leave Chris with an abusive babysitter and then go out and get drunk. They completely ignored all of the signs of Chris's autism. And then finally, when he was like unofficially diagnosed and they were like, hey, y'all, you should probably have something to fucking do with your child, they pretty much said, nah, we're good. And then bribed him with toys all the time, which for any sort of child, that type of bribing behavior sets them up as adults to have that entitlement complex. And it is a fact. I mean, it is an unequivocal fact that Barb and Bob Chandler are pretty much directly and largely responsible for the current state of Chris Chan's life, which by the time we get here in 2023, y'all, it's not fucking good. And much like her husband, she was just vehemently against Chris's cross-dressing tendencies as well, up to and including also calling him a quote fag, said that she did not raise a daughter, that she only had sons, that Tom girl, quote unquote, is not a thing. And then she also offered to pay to get him to stop. So saying that Chris Chan had a chance at life in any capacity is just a grave mistake. I can't say that. Barb is the type of mom that would be like, "You're fucking ugly, you're an idiot, you're dumb, you're a disappointment. You're so handsome, you're so sweet," and then go out of her way to help. That was the kind of mother that Barb was. But most of all, Barb is really, really, really unstable. She has threatened to kill him, and she also introduced the concept of hoarding to the Chandler household. And this is something that's going to resurface time and time again in Chris Chan's life. I mean, you all have seen the show Hoarders. It pretty much almost got that bad. After Bob died and it was just Chris Chan and his mother, Chris was left to care for her. The home fell into disrepair. They begged for money from trolls. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on. And we will get to all of these things. I just wanted to paint a picture of how a grown man, how a 21-year-old man in 2003 can act like this. And it's not just as simple as saying he's autistic, because it's never just that. It's he was autistic. He also suffered from OCD, multiple other things, and then also had parents who were just useless. So that's a long way of saying the child had no chance in hell from the very beginning. Okay, so back to Chris Chan's psychological counseling back in 2004. PVCC said, okay, well, you can come back, but you got to get anger management classes and you have to go to an approved psychological counselor. So he did. So he went to the University of Virginia system. He found doctors Rayner and Dameron, and he went to see them. And again, this intake form, the initial notes, actually somehow leaked online, no idea how. And that's the thing about the Chris Chan story, is so much random shit just appears online. Like, he could go into the DMV and get an updated driver's license, and that screenshot from the system would be online before the end of the day. It's actually pretty incredible how much private, I mean, HIPAA protected stuff from Chris Chan shows up on the freaking internet. So I'm just going to go ahead and read this intake form. Mr. Chandler is a 22-year-old single white male with a history of autism who was referred for psychiatric evaluation following his recent suspension from community college. Mr. Chandler says that since finishing high school and starting at PVCC in the year 2000, he has had an increasing interest in a female companion. His attempts at this ultimately led to his suspension from college. His attempt took the form of a sign, which he placed next to himself while sitting in the lobby at Piedmont. The sign was a list of qualifications that a potential girlfriend would have. He said that he has been very frustrated by his inability to find a girlfriend and he suffers from noviophobia. This refers to his frustration that females often tell him that they already have a boyfriend. While he does have physical attraction towards females, his primary frustration is with his lack of companionship. The patient's parents provided additional historical information and documentation as to the reasons for his suspension from PVCC. According to his parents, there have been a number of incidents which led up to the suspension. They feel strongly that the suspension was unwarranted and did not take into account the patient's developmental limitations. One such occurrence was during an interaction with African American classmates. These young women were questioning the patient regarding his search for a girlfriend, at which point he told them that they could not be his girlfriend because they were not white. This was perceived as racially insensitive, although from the patient's perspective, he was merely pointing out that they did not meet his standard or criteria for a female companion. He says that he was unaware at the time that there were any other connotations to this. Various guidance counselors at the college were working with the patient to help him adjust to the college setting. They had apparently asked him to stop carrying the signs around campus. Per the patient, one of these counselors actually physically destroyed the sign to prevent this behavior. He left an angry note with Miss Mary Lee Walsh, who was in administration. He provided a copy of this note, and it is contained in the chart. It did not specifically threaten her, but expressed his dislike of her and communicated an intimidating glare in a pictorial fashion. Based on the letter sent to him by the college, this was interpreted by the administrator as being a form of harassment. There were several hearings held on the matter, and ultimately the patient was suspended. The criteria that had been set for his return to Piedmont included anger management classes, psychological evaluation, and social skills counseling. He has already undergone psychological evaluation by Robin Hawks at the Center for Learning Potential. The recommendation concerning Mr. Chandler's emotional status is that he seeks psychiatric and psychological treatment. The psychologist felt that counseling and medication would possibly address his obsessive thought patterns and assist him with social skills. She also recommended anger management training. His thought processes were linear and logical. He was somewhat concrete, especially regarding social interactions. He seemed to have good insight into his limitations. As suggested above, his thought content was largely based on his interest in Pokemon and Sonic cartoons. He did not express any delusional thought content. There was perhaps an obsessional quality to his preoccupation with finding a girlfriend, although he did not feel that this was a problem for him. He did not voice any perceptual disturbances and did not seem to be responding to internal stimuli. His impulse control appeared to be good during the interview, and his judgment was fair, although social judgment was likely somewhat limited. And at that point, that's really good insight into the mental state of Chris Chan. In fall of 2005, Chris was allowed back in, and he actually graduated the following year in 2006 with a degree in CAD. And you'd think that would be it, right? You'd think, okay, well, he graduated college, all good, may have gotten a job, whatever. No. Mary Lee Walsh was still taking up a considerable amount of both Chris's headspace and comic space. She was still the arch villain in the early comics and was represented by an elderly, gray-haired woman with a helmet and devil horns. I mean, the art itself was pretty offensive, and one drawing, oh my god, one drawing that he actually made is her sitting in a chair. She's buck naked, sitting in a chair. She is spreading her hoo-ha, spreading her vagina open, saying, God forgive me, I'm never going to see heaven. Quote, "Come and lick my pussy, jerk-off slave." And that was a cartoon that he wrote Mary Lee Walsh into. But soon after he graduated college, Mary Lee Walsh's character in the Sonichu comics kind of changed. By the end of 2006, the Mary Lee Walsh character was suddenly no longer old and gray. She was in her early 20s, super voluptuous with big boobs, and she was wearing a purple miniskirt. And a lot of the content at that point was kind of sexual when it came to her. And in 2009, for some reason, unknown as to why, he must have started to feel kind of bad for his actions because he began to post online about that scenario from years before of getting kicked out of school. He also drew a picture, went and got it framed, and then wrote an apology letter to go with it. He hand-delivered it to PVCC directly to Mary Lee Walsh's office. He walked right in and gave it to her. Now, mind you, he'd been graduated and gone out of school for 3 years. And in this cartoon, Chris Chan is talking to Mary Lee Walsh, and he says, "I'm sorry for using your name in vain and when I constructed PV Citizens and made you look like a fool for about 6 years, Mary Lee Walsh." And apparently Mary Lee Walsh was not impressed by this. She actually immediately, as soon as Chris left her office, she immediately called his parents, and then she also had him sent a trespassing notice. And that actually ended up going to the board, which got him banned from the PVCC campus permanently. And as you can imagine, I mean, Chris Chan had kept on that for 6 years, obsessively drawing her into comics and raging over this. So this triggered him greatly, to say the least. It brought him right back to that 2003-2004 mindset when she was his arch nemesis. So he began naturally posting online again. He said, "Besides which, that bitch Dean Mary Lee Walsh, after I personally went over and handed her a framed hand-drawn apology of my angst against her, she sent me a trespassing notice. While my family and I did not accept it and sent it back to her, I must say that this is one hell of a thank you for going through the trouble and gas usage to personally apologize and make peace." He would randomly, for whatever reason, go after her. So another post said, "And the few who noticed the attraction sign, that evil witch of the private villa of corrupted citizens, Mary Lee Walsh, a bunch of non-blue or black impersonating jerk-ops, manajerks, and every other son and daughter of a whore, mocked me and even crumbled my efforts and threw them into my face. It was a serious heart-shattering insults like that which literally shattered my heart to almost nothing and murdered my soul. Like as if I didn't already understand that love couldn't be hurried. But they all left a huge impression among the general population that having a sweetheart was illegal in Virginia. Thus, Virginia is for virgins, not lovers. Was what I had thought for a long time with the dark forces that were forced into me, betting with my torturing past with the jerks of the Greene County school system during the childhood years of my life. Thank God for blessing me with many happy years at Providence Middle School and Manchester High School in Chesterfield, rounding my feelings and attitude out for today. And we'll cover this in the next episode, but as he got older, he started to act out in public. And not only was he getting into legal trouble, but again, don't forget, he's viral at this point. So a lot of people, especially in the, say, comic or gaming communities and local gaming stores, everyone knew who Chris Chan was. So anything that he did, pictures were snapped of him and it was uploaded online. But that being said, in 2013, Chris Chan also blamed Mary Lee Walsh for him getting kicked out, like banned from his local Walmart. In September of 2013, he would go on to say, quote, "I have just been intercepted by the lady manager. The bitch has followed the steps of Mr. Snyder now. Banned me from the Walmart closest to my own house. She has proven herself to be a cold-hearted, uncaring, uncompassionate, lack of understanding, bigoted, discriminating, selfish, Mary Lee Walshing witch bitch." Now, mind you, he hadn't seen or heard from Mary Lee Walsh in 10 years at that point. That saga of his life was over, and he blamed her for him acting out in Walmart and getting permanently banned. And then the last thing I want to mention particularly about Mary Lee Walsh is that in 2014, there was a second 4-page, fully handwritten apology letter that was leaked and posted online. And in it, Chris actually sincerely apologizes for his actions towards Mary Lee Walsh, but also tells her that, well, all of this happened because of, your actions. If they had never taken place, none of this would have ever happened. But a second apology letter was sent to her. And she is someone that he has repeatedly brought up through his whole entire life. We are going to end this episode here, guys. I just wanted to provide a little bit more context as well as cover Mary Lee Walsh. It may seem like such just a trivial event to us, but it probably, well, not even probably, without a doubt, it is the most defining moment of Chris Chan's life. And all of the fallout, the comics, a lot of it can be attributed to this happening at PVCC with Mary Lee Walsh. So for the next episode, we are going to cover post-college graduation, what he did, what kind of jobs he held, getting into legal trouble in a fight, the internet trolls, and just continue on with the story. We're going to continue going through it. As I mentioned, tomorrow I'm putting out an episode on the Titan submersible drama that's transpired over the last couple of days, and we're going to get down into the science and specifics. And we are going to get down into the science and specifics of what exactly transpired there. I mean, if you're sensitive, this isn't the episode for you because I have some thoughts on this entire debacle. But that is it for today, guys. Thank you so much for listening, as always. Super excited to be back and talk about this. And again, you can find us at WeSellTheDevil.com. From there, you can find all social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, soon to be TikTok, currently working on it, as well as the Patreon. Until next crime.